There are certain episodes of Unsung Heroes that I'm almost a little bit apprehensive about releasing. Not because they won't necessarily get as many views, but because they deserve to, and I just know that not as many people are going to click on certain cars because they don't look as interesting. Something that looks like a boxy, understated sleeper is generally not going to attract as much attention as like a bright yellow hypercar or some failed Le Mans prototype. And that's kind of the point of a sleeper car. They go under the radar. That is the whole idea. This one, though, most definitely deserves a place in this series for so many reasons. And this is the kind of car which really puts a smile on my face because it ticks so many of those boxes to make a car an unsung hero. It's oddball, it's wacky, it's mostly forgotten, it's actually very impressive in terms of its technical prowess, and it's not talked about anywhere near enough. Now, in cult circles, it is an infamous car, but it needs more attention. It deserves more attention, and when you even saw the thumbnail and then the title of the video, unless you were already familiar with the car, you probably did kind of a double take, because when you look at the thumbnail, you think, oh, what is that? Some kind of black American car, maybe a Lincoln, maybe a Cadillac. But then you look at the title and it says, Mosler? What? How can that be a Mosler? Surely Mosler is the company who made some of the greatest performance cars to come out of America since the 90s, originally with the Raptors and the Consuliers, which were banned from racing. Then later on, one of my favourite cars, the MT900, also banned because it was so good, raced in multiple categories, even Super GT in Japan, in the GT300 category of all places. It can't be that same Mosler. Surely, they don't tune cars, they build their own. Well, yeah, it's that same Mosler. It's the exact same company. And this is just one of those occasions where you see a brand make something completely out of their usual wheelhouse, but boy is it interesting, because they actually did produce 5 of these, according to Mosler themselves, and you could have actually bought one on eBay, of all places, in 2016, where it had, I believe the reserve price was just under $40,000. That's pretty good for a Mosler. And good luck finding an MT900 for those kind of prices, but why is it being featured? Is this just a special, fancy, rare, like Gembala or Roof style, tuned up version of an existing car? Just happens to have a Mosler badge, or is it something more? Well, the name kind of gives it away, because this is called the TwinStar. And there are 2 very specific reasons why it's called the TwinStar. The twin refers to the engines that this car has, because no, it doesn't have one, and you can immediately see why I like the car. And the second thing is the star part of the name, because it refers to Northstar, and Northstar is a type of engine which Cadillac has in various forms. They've got Northstar V8s. There was even a very impressive Northstar V12 engine used in the Cadillac Cian concept, a 7.5 litre naturally aspirated V12, putting out 750 horsepower. Very impressive. Could have easily been America's answer to the Zonda or the Aston 177, but of course they didn't produce it, which is a real shame as far as I'm concerned. But this car utilises Northstar V8s. Now, the story behind the vehicle is that Warren Mosler was actually not intending to make a twin-engine Cadillac. He bought a Cadillac Eldorado and actually wanted to make a mid-engine version. Now, I'm not sure exactly why he wanted to do that. Maybe to use it as some kind of base model to develop his next car, something like that. Because you've got to admit, that is kind of what this car looks like. One of those not quite finished test mules that people use to build new vehicles from. For instance, if you do a Google search of the Spiker D12 concept, their concept SUV, which I absolutely adore, you'll also find some very random looking images of a matte black Land Rover, which is really low to the ground, and you probably think, why does that show up? Well, because Spiker used that as a rolling test vehicle to develop their SUV. And that's, to me, what this car looks like. It looks like it wasn't intended to be a Cadillac, but was clearly modified from one with the intentions of creating something else. So maybe that is what Warren Mosler was doing, but when he was building the car, he actually realised before removing the front engine and after fitting the mid-engine, this actually works pretty well. Let's leave it like this. And to me, that's the best idea in the world for creating something so crazy. It was an accident. He didn't even intend to do that and then just thought, you know what, let's go with it and see what happens. So what does happen? Well, the result is that this is a car produced in the year 2000, and it's a Cadillac V16, because it has two V8 engines. It has the standard engine in the front with 275 horsepower, and it has a touring coupe version of the Eldorado's V8 in the back with 300 horsepower. So the combined power is 575 horsepower. Now the two engines are actually completely separate. It gives the car all-wheel drive, but they even have two separate gearboxes, which sounds very risky, but apparently the car is actually very quick. It can run 5 seconds or less to 60, which doesn't sound that impressive these days, especially for a car with 575 horsepower and two engines to work with. But you've got to bear in mind, this is not the most aerodynamic thing around. It was not intended to have that powertrain originally, and let's not forget, this weighs 2.2 tons. That's over 4,700 pounds. In fact, it's close to 4,800. That's extremely heavy, even for a car which is even remotely sporty. Now, incidentally, those two individual gearboxes are both 4-speed, and even with the relatively limited setup of a 4-speed gearbox, it can still apparently run the quarter mile in 12.5 seconds, which again, for a 2.2 ton car, which is, you could say, crudely modified compared to a standard one, crude being a very relative term, that's not bad at all. Now, the top speed is rumoured to be beyond 200 miles per hour, which actually sounds pretty accurate. It probably could do that, given the amount of power, the amount of torque, and also the fact that America has a tendency of building cars that have really good top speed, so I tend to believe that. But with 5 of them built, I am surprised that it's not more of an icon. A cult classic, if you will, because they tried to sell it, as I said. Apparently it didn't sell, as far as I'm aware. I'm sure it's sold since then, but it's a car that you would assume more people would talk about because of how crazy it is. It's not the prettiest thing around. It looks like a brick. The modifications make the back end look very strange. The fact that it has the dual independent gearbox with separate all-wheel drive. You literally have 2 ignitions in the cockpit to start each engine. It's a crazy car for sure, but it's one which, because Warren Mosler was behind it, actually works. Because many people could try something like this and fail spectacularly, but because it's a brilliant guy like him and his company behind it, it did work. Because as far as I'm concerned, Warren Mosler is basically the modern day Jim Hall of Chaparral. He is an entrepreneur. He's a brilliant mind when it comes to the car world. Definitely one of my favourite guys in the car world, because just look at all the different vehicles he's made. The original Consulier was brilliant, dominated in its own way. The MT900 dominated in motorsport. And look at this. It's a car which shouldn't even work. Why would you even want to build it? And yet he built it, he made it work, and it's one of the craziest Cadillacs ever. And certainly one of the quickest Cadillacs around for a number of years before and after this. In fact, you could argue it's probably still technically the fastest factory-built Cadillac on the street, at least until the CTS-V was produced much more recently. So, to me, this is the exact kind of car that deserves a place in Unsung Heroes. It's crazy, it's understated, it's often forgotten, and it's not the only car that is kind of crazy and left field from Warren Mosler, or at least from that kind of little empire of Mosler as a whole. So we're going to be returning to the world of Mosler in the future of this series, but for now, this one I think is an amazing car, and it definitely deserves a place here. And you can add it to the little group of twin-engine vehicles that we seem to talk about every so often here, like the MTM Bimoto TT Quattro from Audi. But that's it for this installment. Of course, if you do want to check out all of the previous episodes of this series, and if you're checking it out later, future episodes as well, then click through here on screen. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.